Hello guys and welcome as always to Let's Talk About It. On today's episode we're going to be looking at the subject of nuclear weapons and the impact that they have had and could have on the world. So in simple terms, a nuclear bomb is a weapon of mass destruction that gets its destructive power from either fission or a combination of fission and fusion reaction. In either case, nuclear bombs are capable of producing vast amounts of energy from a relatively small amount of matter. With that in mind, it's worth noting that there are currently around 13,000 nuclear warheads in existence, with the United States owning roughly 5,500 of these and Russia owning approximately 6,250 nuclear warheads, which between them, let alone all the other countries with nuclear weapons, is a hell of a lot of power at their disposal. So of course, nuclear weapons didn't just appear overnight. They needed an inventor, and the man that invented the very first nuclear bomb, the atomic bomb, is a man called J. Robert Oppenheimer, who was a theoretical physicist working for the United States during World War II. And he headed up a research and development department known as the Manhattan Project, whose sole task was to create a nuclear weapon. And on July 16, 1945, he and his team achieved just that, because it was then, in a remote desert in New Mexico, that they launched the Trinity test, which saw the detonation of the world's first atomic or nuclear bomb, which sent a mushroom cloud 40,000 feet into the air, ushered in the atomic age, and gave Oppenheimer the moniker of the father of the atomic bomb. And then, less than a month later, on August 6, 1945, the United States took their new weapon to war when they dropped an atomic bomb nicknamed Little Boy onto the Japanese city of Hiroshima. The resulting explosion devastated a 5-mile square radius, instantly killed 80,000 people, and saw tens of thousands more people dying from radiation exposure. And then, 3 days later, the Japanese city of Nagasaki suffered the same fate, when a nuclear bomb known as the Fat Man was detonated, killing 40,000 people on impact. Now, whilst those terrible events are well known, there have been other times that nuclear bombs have been detonated that you may not be aware of. One example of this is the Castle Bravo detonation that took place on the 1st of March 1954 in Bikini Atoll in the Marshall Islands. This was the first in a series of tests performed by the USA under the Operation Castle banner, and the results of it were far more devastating and far more powerful than scientists had previously predicted. The explosion was 1,000 times more powerful than the bomb that had devastated Hiroshima. It sent a 4.5-mile wide mushroom cloud 130,000 feet into the air, sending radioactive fallout across a 7,000 square foot area of inhabited atolls, resulting in evacuations some 3 days later and leaving a legacy of devastation across the atolls for years to come. Another example is that of the Soviet Union's Tsar bomber, which to date is the world's most powerful and destructive nuclear weapon ever created. So when this weapon was detonated on October 30th, 1961, the resulting explosion was unimaginably powerful. Anything within 36 miles of the initial blast zone was vaporized, and a mushroom cloud 40 miles high by 60 miles wide pushed radioactive fallout some 150 miles in any direction, damaging properties and the environment, showing just how devastating a single nuclear blast could be. And then of course the question comes up as to what would it be like to be caught in a modern day nuclear explosion? Well, at the moment of detonation, a blinding white light and a scorching heat would cover a 1.5-mile radius. Following that would be a fireball that would, at its centre, be tens of millions of degrees, which is as hot as the centre of the sun. Buildings would be toppled, vegetation would be burnt away, and power and communication lines would be destroyed. And on the tail end of this fireball would be an immense wave of pressure that would travel at the speed of sound, producing winds of up to 500 miles per hour, which would shatter glass, level buildings, fell trees, and all of that would happen in a matter of seconds. And then comes the effect on living things. For anyone or anything caught in the initial blast zone, they would be turned to ash in an instant, making, at the very least, for a quick death. For anyone outside of the initial blast zone, the immense wall of heat that would hit them would cause unsurvivable burns, and of course the risk of death from falling buildings and rubble and trees being thrown around by the immense winds would be very high too. But if you are fortunate enough to survive that, or you are far enough away from the blast zone, the chances are that the fallout created from the nuclear explosion will get you in the end. Because as radioactive debris created from the blast rains down on people outside or in weakly insulated areas, exposure to this hazardous material will cause damage on a molecular level, altering and damaging DNA, resulting in cancers or the failure of their immune and digestive systems as radiation sickness takes over. And this nuclear fallout can travel up to 20 miles, covering everything in its path in a fine radioactive cancer-causing dust, whilst less radioactive areas of this plume, known as the hot zone, can travel up to 60 miles in any direction. And that's just a result of a single nuclear bomb being detonated. What if multiple nuclear bombs were detonated at the same time due to a nuclear war? Well, clearly the results would be catastrophic, and it would see the human race entering a prolonged nuclear winter. This nuclear winter would be triggered by millions of tons of smoke and ash and soot from giant firestorms being forced into the stratosphere, where a thick layer of black smoke would block out any natural light, leading to widespread crop failure, global famine, and ushering in a new ice age. Now, by this stage, billions of people would be dead, and the only people still alive would have to be living in huge underground fallout shelters. But even underground, these people still wouldn't be safe, because it's theorized that in these underground shelters, these bunkers, a growing insect population would spread disease rapidly amongst the survivors, leading to many more deaths until, as cruel as nature is, only the strongest have survived. Eventually, the deaths would stop and people would take to life underground, which comes with its own set of theoretical issues and problems. With the possibility that people could be living underground for decades, if not longer, it's a fairly safe bet to make that as the generations go on, they would have a very different social structure to us and probably a very different idea of civilization to what we know to be civilization. People would likely become segregated into groups or clans where rations and supplies would become highly valued commodities that would only increase in value as the bunker's population also increases. But what happens when these people venture back to the surface? Would we see a Mad Max post-apocalyptic wasteland emerge? Well, yes, possibly. Because to rebuild on both an actual and metaphorical level would require skills and experiences and knowledge which may have very well been lost to the people of the past. If people underground had no reason to build, would they learn to build? If they had no reason to harvest crops, would they know how to harvest crops? And then of course comes the fact that even if you could get people to work together and you had the knowledge and the experience and the equipment needed, when people realise that supplies and rations overhead are equally as scarce, and they have to avoid being eaten by the predators that at this point would no doubt be ruling the earth, the chances are people will put their survival and the survival of their group, of their clan, far above helping anybody else, which would more than likely lead to more deaths and more devastation as people fight over limited resources. So, from this combination of facts and theories, I think it's clear that a nuclear holocaust would be our extinction event. But, over thousands of years, a new form of humanity would emerge. They'd have their own history, their own social structures, their own beliefs, their own technologies. They'd have, quite simply, a different way of life. And the chances are they wouldn't chalk their existence up to the Big Bang Theory or an act of God. They would see themselves as being born in the ashes of a nuclear wasteland. Well guys, that brings me to the end of another video. Of course, I really hope you liked it. I hope you got something out of it. If you did, please give me a like. If you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.